W420radionetwork.com.
Hey, today we're going to do a little time traveling. Let's go back into the Wayback Machine, like 1971, the year the Pentagon Papers were published by the New York Times. The voting age dropped from 21 to 18. Starbucks opened its first coffee shop, and Richard Nixon launched his war on drugs. How'd that work out? Well, today we welcome in two of the original 420 Waldos 50 years later. I guess the war on drugs didn't work out too well, guys. And you guys coined a phrase that has lived beyond its years. Amazing. So thanks so much for making the time. Dave-Reddix, Steve Capper, two of the original Waldos and the 420 guys. So tell me how this came about. I know you've told the story 50 million times, but once more for the America's Cannabis Conversation.
We'll tell it one more time. This is actually, as you know, this is the 50th anniversary of creating the term 420. So back in the 70s, early 70s, we were, there wasn't much going on. You'd go to a football game on Friday night and cruise around and look for parties, right? So we're sitting under the grandstand smoking a doobie going, what are we doing here? There's got to be something better than this. So Steve, go ahead.
Well, we first started with something called safaris. I was reading, my brother had Rolling Stone magazine, which in 1971 was total counterculture. Nobody got that magazine at all. And I was reading an article about down in the South Bay, there were some scientists that were developing the first holograms. And back then, 71, like images made, three-dimensional images made out of laser light. It's total science fiction. It said they were there 24 hours a day working on their stuff and they were excited. And so I go, whoa, what the hell? I used to take Cub Scout field trips. I'll go down and pound on their door and see if they'd show me they had a holographic city, a whole city made out of holographic light. So I went down there, I pounded on the door, and they just welcomed me and showed me everything they were doing. And we had a lot of laughs, and they go, hey, I'll go back and get the Waldos, and we'll all go down there. So the following week, I said, you guys got to see this. We piled in the car. Of course, we got high. We went down there and we pounded on the door and hung out with these scientists. We had them cracking up, laughing. And we go, well, that's great. Something else to do besides go to the football game. So we decided each week we were going to do something unusual and different rather than the normal stuff. And Dave named these little adventures. Dave?
Yeah, well, we said, hey, this is kind of like we're going on a safari. Why don't we just call them safaris? So every week we try to come up with something new to do that's, we were like seekers. We wanted to do something fun, meet interesting, weird people and do weird things. And that's what our goal was.
So one day we hung out on a wall in the center of campus at Rafael High School. That's why we call ourselves the Waldos. We hung out on a wall. And one day I'm sitting on the
let's
wall.
preface that before you get there. Okay. We used to sit on this wall and breaks between class, and we'd watch all the people walk by and we'd do impressions of these people. And, we'd try to crack each other up as we watch these people going by. That was, we were totally into comedy. So
we created hundreds of catchphrases and slogans. And 420 was another one of our slogans. 420 is just the tip of the iceberg of our Waldo culture. Anyway, so sitting on the wall, a buddy of mine comes up and he goes, hey, my brother's in the U.S. Coast Guard out at Point Reyes. And for some reason, these guys, and they're growing weed. And for some reason, these Coast Guard guys think that their commanding officer is going to bust them. They don't want to get busted. So they decided to relinquish their growing patch. And they decided that Bill and his friends, which was us, could pick it. And the Coast Guard guy made a map of where the weed was. And I showed it to Dave. Dave got excited.
Oh, yeah, it was like a no-brainer. You're 16-year-old kid. You have no money. Free weed. It's a no-brainer.
So what about the 420 moniker? How did that come into play? I mean, one would think it's 4:20 in the afternoon. Let's get together. Let's get high. And by the way, for those out of the Bay Area, San Rafael High School, about 20 miles north of San Francisco, in the epicenter of the counterculture movement back a half a century ago.
Right. So we not only were we, just Waldos, we weren't typical stoners. We're not Spicoli, at Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Most people think stoners, they're lethargic, they're lazy, they're forgetful. No, we were active, or getting awards for exceeding in classes. We were athletes, everything, but we
You weren't stupid stoners, no.
No, absolutely not stupid stoners. Not everything you see in movies. So a couple of the guys had football practice for we got out of school around 3 o'clock. It was a flexible schedule. Some got out at 3:10, some got out at 3:15. So a couple of the Waldos, they had football practice about approximately an hour. So we decided to meet. There's a statue of the chemist Louis Pasteur, who invented pasteurization. And we decided to meet at the statue of Louis Pasteur at 420 to get high and go find this weed that the guys in the Coast Guard were growing. So we would remind each other in the hallways all day long. We'd see each other and we'd nod, smile, we go 420 Louis.
420 Louis.
And then of course we meet, we smoke, we go look for the pot. After about the third week of trying to find it, we just dropped Louis and we just smile and we go 420.
We knew that we could use this little code. It was our secret code, and we could use it, in front of our teachers, our parents, cops. Nobody knew what we were talking about. We referenced 420 and we knew what we were talking about, but they didn't. So it was our own secret little code.
And it passed from us to our younger brothers, the class behind them. We went away to college. We used it with people, from other cities when we were away at college, and it spread. And then there's the Grateful Dead one of the Grateful Dead connections with Dave. Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, my brother Patrick, he was friends with Phil Lesh for like 50 years, and they're good friends. And in 1975, the Dead took about almost a year off, and so Phil started a couple bands. One was called Sea Stones, and the other one was called Too Loose to Truck. And he asked my brother Pat if he could manage them, and Pat said sure. And Pat hired me to be a roadie for these bands, and we were getting high backstage with, I was getting high backstage with Phil Lesh and guys like David Crosby and Terry Haggerty of the Sons, who was in Too Loose to Truck. And I started spreading it around that way. And over the years, the Dead crew were using it a little bit, and then it spread out. So
and then there was another thing, Waldo and Mark. By the way, there's 5 Waldos. There's Dave, there's Steve, there's Mark, there's Larry, and there's Jeff. And you can switch out one Waldo for the other in an interview.
It's kind of like the Three Stooges. You could bring a Shemp in for a Curly.
It's kind of like changing deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah, well, but you're unlike the Titanic. So here you guys are, half a century later, as the merry pranksters of the day, and still retain that spirit of the 60s counterculture and the like. Can you tell me how cannabis played into that? I mean, it was a fun and invigorating and creative source of, what you did back in the day. How about as it evolved in your lives?
Well, first of all, people these days, because it's just, legal and people are buying at the store, and you're driving down the freeway and there's billboards for cannabis delivery. People forget how illegal it was. And we spent our entire lives looking over our shoulder, running, using our
secret places and trying to score weed, and we knew you could get busted. You could get thrown in jail for 10 years for a joint back there in some states.
Building pipes out of watermelons, toilet rolls, and everything else. We were like outlaws. We were desperados, comedic desperados. And an interesting part of our story is Waldo Jeff. His father was one of the highest level narcotics officers in the state of California. So there's a whole interesting aspect of the story. One of the guys who started 420, his dad was a narc.
Jeff knew all about search and seizure laws. So he clued us into things like, if you have something in your glove box and it's locked, the cops can't ask you to open it without getting a warrant. And one time we were up at Lake Tahoe, Steve, me, and Jeff, and so Jeff and I went into the casino. We're at State Line, and Steve says, I'm going to roll some doobies, come back in a little while. And we split, Jeff and I, and then we started coming back, and then we see Steve with these Nevada sheriff's cars, a couple of them around the car, and they're trying to bust Steve. So,
there's a whole funny story there. That's kind of a long story. I don't know how much time we have.
Well, I'd love to hear an essence of, because this really, as I say, personifies the spirit of the time, where you had to be, it's a cat and mouse dodging the lawman. And today it's, part of the culture. It's so much more accepted. But the evolution is fascinating. And in a lot of ways, you guys in that time helped launch it. So I'm just curious how it evolved for you through the decades.
Well, we didn't know we were creating history at the time. All we knew is we were having fun. We were all about having fun and having adventures, So as the years went by, we started noticing, about 1996 or even earlier, we started noticing people were spray painting 420 on signs and rocks and carving it into benches. And one day, Waldo Larry Schwartz called up Steve and says, "Hey, this is everywhere. We got to do something about this, Steve."
So to secure the origins of this, because it went off into so many theories. Half the country thought it was a police code for being busted for marijuana or transporting marijuana or whatever. And then there were other theories. It was the time, I don't know, it's evolved over the years. The time Jerry Garcia died, not true. There's 420 chemical constituents and THC, which is the part which gets you high. So we said, we got to get the origin straight. So I wrote a letter to High Times, and they, the editor-in-chief, he flew out to California and documented. We have all kinds of physical evidence proof, and he documented this. And that was kind of the launch of the world beginning to get to know us. And then eventually Huffington Post and New York Times and LA Times and everybody started examining further. And we have the history. We have it on our website, 420waldos.com.
And we keep all the physical documents of our proof in a safe deposit box at the Wells Fargo Bank in San Francisco. And guess what the address is? It's 420 Montgomery Street.
Oh, I love it. That's serendipity. And Lagunitas Brewery has a Waldo Special Ale in your honor.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, Lagunitas was doing some experimentation with different beers, and they were doing, like celebrity beers, like with Frank Zappa and family and other rock stars, and they had these psychedelic labels, and they're creating these beers. They were like, just one-off beers. They contacted us, and they said, "We'd love to do a beer with you guys." So we said, "Yeah, that would be cool." So we went up there and we picked out all the hops, and we wanted to pick the hops the dankest and smelled mostly like marijuana and tasted like marijuana. So we picked out the hops, they brewed it up, and they released it, and the rest is history. Because
we've been doing it for what, 7 years or 8 years now?
No, more like 9 years now.
It's seasonal. They start brewing it about a month or two before 420.
And it'll be in the stores very, very shortly. Last year, they didn't have it in the stores in bottles because of the pandemic, but this year it'll be in bottles, and it'll be released nationwide because they have Heineken owns Lagunitas now, and they have a brewery in Chicago to cover the East Coast, and they have the brewery in Petaluma to cover the West Coast and all in between. So the beer should be out there. It should be on the shelves real soon. So go out and get a pack.
The carton that has the beers in it, it has our story on the outside. So there's the story is woven into all their marketing.
Now, it's not like the High Hops, which is a non-alcoholic beer infused with cannabis. This is how would you describe the Waldo Special Ale that Lagunitas makes? It's beer, but it's with the hops that you guys selected or preferred?
Yes. There's actually a video on our website of us going around. It's pretty funny, of us selecting the hops. It's tragically hip.
Yeah.
So
tragically hip.
So you guys say that you belied that stoner, deadbeat image a half a century ago. What did you guys do with your careers? You five, the so-called Beatles of 420. What did you guys do with careers and lives and such?
Well, I started off in broadcasting. I was a disc jockey up at Lake Tahoe. And then I got into television production. I worked over at KPIX for a few years. Then I went to PM Magazine. I was a satellite producer and coordinator. And then I went to CNN, and I was a cameraman there, freelance and staff, for about 20 years. And I work with Don Knapp, like you said, you know, Don. He was one of the
Yes.
greatest reporters I ever worked with, a great guy. So after they closed the bureau in San Francisco, that was about 2001. I went over to Tech TV for about a year. And then Paul Allen folded that company, and I've been an independent filmmaker since.
He's also a social director on a tugboat.
That's right.
All right. How about the rest of your buddies?
I had 30 years ago, I started from like a 6 foot by 6 foot cubicle. That's a real specialty kind of finance company. It's accounts receivables funding in specialty niches. I had it about 30 years. Right now, I'm actually the technologies that we've developed. I hope in the next 6 months that I can take these technologies to facilitate other people financing receivables in the cannabis space.
Sweet.
So see if I can put that together.
Awesome. How are you guys going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of your 420, pioneering efforts?
It'll be a virtual celebration followed by deli platters.
We probably, with the pandemic last year, we did some interviews, and I actually hooked up with Waldo Larry, and we were on the iPhone, and we shared a virtual joint. I'd take a puff and pass it to him, and he'd take it and pass it back to me. So I don't know what we're doing this year, but whatever it is.
Last year we did a virtual celebration with ArcView Group, which is kind of like the entire marijuana industry, not so much the public. And they want us back. They really want us back this year. So we agreed to do that this year.
We'll be on with Steve D'Angelo, the high king of weed, for medical marijuana and things like. He owns the Harborside over in Oakland.
Right. Yeah, we appeal to a small select group of confused people.
Well, what's cool is that you're Zooming and you're on Zoom. So it's all how appropriate. Guys, it's been awesome catching up with you. Congratulations on this iconic half century of the 420 Waldos. You deserve all the accolades you've gotten, and great luck in the future. If you want to hear more or listen again, go to the W420radionetwork.com/archive. Rich Walcoff with the Waldos, the 420 founders, Dave-Reddix and Steve Capper. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks for having us.
Happy 420.
Right on. We'll be right back.
W420radionetwork.com.